All right, so before we move any further, I want to talk a little bit about middleware, which is kind of a difficult concept to understand, especially if you're coming from like a PHP background. So this is the documentation page for Express middleware, and it says Express is a routing and middleware web framework that has minimal functionality of its own. An Express application is essentially a series of middleware function calls. So middleware, they're basically just functions that have access to this request and response object. And then middleware functions can do things like execute code, they can make changes to the request and response objects, they can end the request response cycle, and they can call the next middleware function in the stack. So I think the best way to show you or to explain this is to create our own little piece of middleware. So let's go over here and let's go above our routes. And I'm just going to put a comment in here. I'm going to say how middleware works. And we're going to say app.use. And by the way, when you install modules, like let's say we're going to install handlebars or Express handlebars, which is a template engine, and that has its own middleware that you have to include in the app.js file. Well, it doesn't have to be in the app.js file, but it usually is. When we install body parser to deal with form data, that has its own middleware that we have to install. All right, so you're going to see this app.use quite a bit. But let's go ahead and say app.use, and we're going to pass in a function. All right, and then this function is going to take request, response, and next. Okay, so we now have access to this request and response object. Now, all I'm going to do is go ahead and just console log. Let's console log, and let's put in the time. So we'll just console log date dot now. Okay, that'll get us the current time. That should be a dot. And then we just want to call the next piece of middleware to run. So we do that by just saying next. So let's go ahead and save that. And now I'm going to go over here. I'm just going to reload my about page. And notice every time I reload down here, it's console logging the time, okay, the timestamp. So we've actually created our own middleware, and we do have access to this request and response. So for instance, I want to say request.name equals, and I'm going to put in my name here. And so what I did is I set a request variable. Now this request variable, now I can access throughout our application. So if we go down to the index, and let's say we want to just console.log, and we'll say request.name. All right, and let's comment out the time so we don't see that anymore. But let's go ahead and save. If I reload about, nothing happens, but if we go to the index route, you'll see that it's logging Brad Traversy every time I reload. Okay, so we had access to that request object, we added something to it, and now we have access to it in our route. All right, so this is how like authentication works with Passport, which we're going to get into much later. It will, once you log in, it'll put your user information from the session into request.user, and then you can access that from anywhere. Okay, so that's essentially how a lot of different node modules will work with Express. All right, and we can do whatever we want with this name. We can send it to the browser if we want. So if we say res send request name and we reload, we get Brad Traversy. All right, so I just wanted to give you just a little example to try and explain middleware just a little bit, because it is a kind of confusing subject, but we're not going to have to really deal with it. We're not going to write any custom middleware. We're just going to be including middleware for third-party modules that we're going to be using. All right, so I'm actually going to clear this stuff out. Let me just undo this, because this isn't part of our application. I just wanted to show you that, but that's it. So we'll go ahead and save that, and there we go. All right, so in the next video, we're going to get into template engines. We're actually going to be using Handlebars, which is, in my opinion, the best template engine available for Node. But we'll talk about some of the other ones as well, and I will see you in the next video.